humans, welcome back to Sylveon Explains, the series on my channel where I combine my two favorite things, cosplay and talking about a piece of weird or obscure media that I find interesting and I think more people should know about. So today we are talking about the Birth of Mewtwo, not the animated version, but the original Japanese radio drama. This was a series of 5 short scenes that delves into Mewtwo's history, with previously unknown information on both Mewtwo and Team Rocket. It was never released in English, other than the animated adaptation, which I will get into. However, the animated adaptation excludes a large portion of the content, so that is why I want to go over the original radio drama here. Since the anime was aimed at kids, it's understandable why they left some parts out, as it delves into some deeper subject matter, such as death, the ethics of cloning, and existential crises. This radio drama was broadcast on the radio in Japan on the 5 Sundays leading up to the release of the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, in 1998. In 1999, it was released with the movie soundtrack in Japan on CD. It's all available on YouTube now, which is wonderful. You guys can go listen to it if you want to, and has been translated by fans, which I think is really awesome. So as I said earlier, a portion of this was adapted into a 10-minute animated segment for television airings and DVD releases in Japan. It was released in English as a bonus feature on the DVDs from Mewtwo Returns, and is also available on YouTube if you want to go check it out, like I said earlier. In addition to the CD, it also included a little booklet in it that had a bunch of art that goes along with the story, and I will pop a couple pictures on screen as I am going through each part of it, so you can enjoy those. I will also have them linked in the description down below if you want to go through all of them, because I'm not going to put all of them on screen, just the ones I find the most interesting. So with that, let's dive into the 5 parts. I'm going to be going over each one on its own, starting with a brief synopsis of it and then giving my final thoughts on each one. And then at the end, I will wrap up everything with one final conclusion. So let's dive into it. So part 1 is called The Mythical Mew. This was the part that was not adapted at all into the 10-minute segment. All of the other parts have sections of them that have been animated, but this one I find the most interesting because it definitely delves into some lore that we have not heard anywhere else. So we begin with a brief scene of Giovanni contemplating the history of the creation of Pokémon. This leads into reporters discussing the discoveries of several Pokémon species, including Dragonair, Gyarados, and Kabutops. It is revealed that Giovanni is going to show a film about the history of Team Rocket as they race to find rare Pokémon. Since this is a radio drama, we obviously can't see him showing said film, but there are plenty of sound effects in the background so that we know what is happening. His film reveals an event from 20 years ago, involving Madame Boss, who is Giovanni's mom and the previous leader of Team Rocket, and a Rocket member named Miyamoto, who we later find out is Jessie from the anime's mom. Miyamoto brings a tape to Madame Boss explaining that in areas with limited sight, such as jungles, they can use voice recordings to track down Pokémon. After eliminating the sounds of the wind, the trees, the water, and the sounds of common Pokémon in the area, the tape begins to play music. The music is a folk song in honor of a mysterious phantom Pokémon, as she describes it. They are briefly sidetracked with discussing their kids. This is where we start to see the relationship between Madame Boss and Giovanni develop. Madame Boss describes Giovanni as a little brat boy, and it's quite clear that they don't have the best relationship. Miyamoto reveals that she sent her daughter to a foster home so that she could continue her research in South America and with Team Rocket. Miyamoto says that her motto is 1. Profit, 2. Economize, no 3 or 4, and 5. Pokémon. I think that's so funny, and I had to add it in here. Madame Boss then calls her the ideal image of Team Rocket. So back to the recording, Miyamoto removes the folk music and finally reveals the most important thing that she captured, a small Pokémon cry that no one has heard before. She is certain that it is Mew, which is what the people of the area call this phantom Pokémon. The cry was headed into the nearby mountains, so Madame Boss sends a 3-person search team after it. It is implied that Giovanni's film ends here, as now we will see things happening in real time. It then cuts to Miyamoto on the mountain, alone, only accompanied by a photo of her daughter, which is then revealed to be Jessie in this scene. As the sun comes up over the snowy mountains, she finally encounters Mew. She shows Mew the photo of her daughter, explaining that she needs the money from capturing Mew to pay for her daughter's expenses. At the talk of money, Mew gets upset and leaves, and a blizzard starts. An avalanche can be heard in the background, with the final note of the scene being Mew's cry. The implication here is that Mew attempted to kill her, however, later parts would indicate that she is not dead but simply stranded in the mountains, still searching out the phantom Pokémon. So that's where part 1 wraps up. Obviously, we get a lot of lore for different characters in the anime that we're familiar with, and a little bit of their backstories and what their families are like. I have 4 main thoughts on this section. So first of all, this one's kind of a silly one, but this confirms that South America exists in the Pokemon world. I brought this up in my Pokemon Christmas CD video, but sometimes they'll just reference like very real world things. So now we know in the lore of Pokemon, South America exists. So if you need that information, there you go. My second thought is, what happened to the other Team Rocket members that went with Miyamoto? It was said that none of them returned from the journey, but it's very unclear what happened to them. Did they die off in the cold, or did they just simply give up and leave? it's unknown. Thirdly, Miyamoto's feelings towards her daughter. At first, she seems to be cold and only cares about Team Rocket and getting money, but then later on we see the softer side of her when she's talking to Mew and explains that she only wants the money so that she can take care of her daughter. I think it's interesting to see the different sides of this character and how she acts around different characters, and it kind of makes Mew look bad for, burying her in an avalanche. And my fourth thought is, this gives us a lot of lore, obviously, and I kind of have a theory that Giovanni is aware that Miyamoto is Jesse's mom. Obviously, he is aware that she exists. However, I wonder if this is why he keeps Jessie around on Team Rocket, because even though she keeps failing at her job, maybe there's some guilt there of like, hey, Team Rocket's kind of responsible for her disappearance, so maybe that's why he keeps Jessie around. I just think that's a fun theory. Let me know what you guys think down below. But anyway, now let's move on to part 2. So now let's dive into part 2, which is called The Birth of Mewtwo. This is also the name of the radio drama as a whole, but also this part. So it's been 18 years since the last contact with the Mew search team. Team Rocket has set up excavation sites in South America, where an unknown fossil is uncovered. It is sent to Dr. Fuji, who is an expert in Pokemon cloning, and he is able to identify it as an unknown Pokemon. He is able to extract a vocal sample from the DNA, which is a match to what was found on Miyamoto's tape. Dr. Fuji and Giovanni then sing a pun-like song. I think this is so funny that the tone of the rest of this is very serious and kind of dark, and then there's this scene where they're just singing, and it's really funny. I highly recommend you guys go listen to this, because it's silly. But anyway, Dr. Fuji then reveals that his human clones have not been a success, but that does not mean that cloning won't work on Pokemon. In his laboratory, Fuji explains that Pokemon are not his motive for his cloning research. His daughter Amber died in a car accident, and he hopes that he can revive a clone of her. In a conversation with Amber's clone that he has created, he reveals that human clones can only live for 4 years, but that Pokemon have a much stronger life force, and they could allow the clones to live for longer. However, Amber's clone tries to discourage his cloning research, her soul seemingly wanting to move on. A month later, Mewtwo is born from Mew's DNA, and Amber 2, as her clone is called, is very excited. She refers to herself as Mewtwo's mother or older sister. So obviously this part's quite short, it's just how Mewtwo is created by Dr. Fuji, and I only really have 2 thoughts on this one. First of all, I'm very curious about the science behind pulling vocal samples from DNA. I'm not sure how that works, but if someone wants to explain it to me, I'd be very curious if it even is a thing that can happen. And second of all, Amber 2 is not the first human clone. Since Dr. Fuji explains that human clones can only live for 4 years, I think that this implies that there was probably another human clone before her. I would be very curious to see how that went down. How did his research start on this, I guess, and how did he learn how to create these clones? It's not really relevant in the grand scheme of things here, but I always like more information, so I'd be very curious about his previous clones and how they ended up. But that brings us to the end of part 2, so let's go to part 3. So part 3 is called Mewtwo and Amber, and this is where we start to see the relationship between Mewtwo and Amber 2 develop. We begin the scene inside Mewtwo's mind, who is questioning where he is and who he is and what he is. Dr. Fuji explains that although this version of Mew is different in looks, it may be much stronger than the original Pokemon. However, they're unable to know it at this time since it's in a sleeping state inside a glass test tube. In Mewtwo's mind, he tries to figure out who is talking and what they are saying. Amber 2 then appears and explains that they are human words and that she is a human as well. Mewtwo is confused about how they are communicating, and Amber 2 says that she might be a human, she might be a Pokemon, but regardless, they were born the same way, and that's why they can communicate with each other. Amber 2 then reveals that there are other clones, and we can hear the cries of the Kanto starters and later on Pikachu in the background. She explains that they all have 2 after their names since they are clone, even saying that she might be the 3rd Amber, or the 4th. This goes back to my idea that Amber 2 is not the first clone of Amber. She says that she doesn't care if she's real or what number she is. We cut back to the lab where the researchers realize through the brainwaves that Mewtwo and Amber 2 are communicating despite being asleep in their glass tubes. Amber 2 explains other concepts to Mewtwo, such as the sun and moon, and what cake is, even though she can't eat it in the test tube. I think it's very cute that they keep this childlike aspect to Amber's character, because she is a child after all. Mewtwo asks if they have a papa and mama, and Amber 2 replies with, "God, I guess." They talk more, but Amber's voice starts to fade. Dr. Fuji then explains to the audience that her clone is dying. As she fades, Mewtwo starts to cry and is confused by the emotion. Amber 2 explains that living things shed tears when they are hurt, but only humans cry because they are sad. She tells Mewtwo to live, because living will be wonderful. This part ends with another clip from Miyamoto on the mountain, wandering around in the snow and begging Mew to reveal itself. So obviously this part ends on a much more somber note. We see that now Mewtwo's clone is alive, and it's able to communicate with the other clones, and it seems to have made a friend in Amber 2, however, Amber 2 is now dying. I have 3 main thoughts on this section. First of all, I really appreciate the fact that we get all of these like dates and timelines throughout it. It makes it a lot simpler to put together a timeline. Like, obviously we know that it's been 18 years since the fossil was uncovered, and since human clones can only live for 4 years, this version of Amber was created 4 years ago. And I think it's very helpful that that is here. My second question is, what happens to the other Pokemon clones? They fade away as well in the animated version, but it's kind of unclear what happens here. We can hear their cries in the background, so I am assuming that they fade away as well as Amber does. And thirdly, Miyamoto's dialogue imagines her daughter reaching different milestones in her life, implying that she is aware that time is passing and that she is still alive in the mountains. However, she has no desire to go back until she finds Mew. So now let's go into part 4. Part 4 is called The Strongest Pokemon in the World. Amber 2 dissolves in her glass tube, but Dr. Fuji is surprisingly not upset, stating that he can just keep making more clones. Mewtwo is upset by this, believing that there is only one Amber and that it's not right for the doctor to make as many clones as he wants. The researcher then says that Mewtwo's brainwaves are agitated and he is then tranquilized. Because there is such a small sample of Mew's DNA, they can't risk anything happening to this clone. Unlike Amber, they cannot create an unlimited amount of Mew clones. Mewtwo explains then that he was asleep for a long time, and it is implied here that there's quite a big time skip between this and what happens next. His thoughts continue to be the same phrase repeated. Where is this? Who am I? Who brought me here? His glass container shatters, and the researcher exclaims that the experiment is a success. Dr. Fuji is shocked, stating that Mewtwo's psychic powers are beyond the normal range. Mewtwo then begins to destroy the laboratory, but is shot down by the computer's security system, and his life pulse goes flat. However, Mewtwo's life responses start up again as he begins to regenerate himself. Fuji is amazed by Mewtwo's power, but the automated computer continues to try to take Mewtwo down until Mewtwo destroys the computer. Dr. Fuji then speaks directly to Mewtwo, referring to him as a Pokemon, and sending Mewtwo into an existential crisis. At this point, Mewtwo is unsure if he is human, or Pokemon, or something else. He is very confused about where he came from, first believing that Mew is his parent, then God, and then finally humans. Mewtwo asks what his purpose is, and Dr. Fuji explains that he wanted to make the world's strongest Pokemon. Mewtwo decides to reveal his full strength to prove whether or not Dr. Fuji's dream came true. However, the lab explodes, killing Dr. Fuji and the researchers in the process. Mewtwo then seeks out Mew, and ends up encountering Giovanni instead. Giovanni convinces Mewtwo to join him in proving that Mewtwo is the strongest Pokemon, which would fulfill what Mewtwo believes to be his purpose. He agrees to join Giovanni and allows Giovanni to use different devices to control his power. We once again end on Miyamoto in the mountains, now imagining her daughter as an adult ready to be married off. She is still on the hunt for Mew. I don't have too many thoughts in this section, I only have 2 that I wrote down. So first of all, I want to just bring up the fact, it seems like we gloss over the fact that Mewtwo just like kills a bunch of people here, and it's never really brought up again, and there's no consequences for it really. I think that's kind of funny. And second of all, obviously with Miyamoto's story, we are now seeing that she knows her daughter is an adult now, and that she's missed out on her entire childhood. However, it doesn't matter to her, she just continues to seek out Mew, and I think that says a lot about her character and what her drive is. So now let's go into part 5, which is called Mewtwo Strikes Back, and is also the name of the first movie. Now teamed up with Giovanni, Mewtwo is helping Team Rocket to defeat and steal Pokemon, going even as far as to attack humans. Mewtwo believes that he is the strongest Pokemon, as he has not failed a battle yet. However, he starts to question humanity. After seeing Team Rocket, he thinks that all humans care about is money and greed, and that they are worthless. He also views other Pokemon as weak, since they follow the commands of their trainers. This once again is putting Mewtwo in the situation where he doesn't relate to humans, but also doesn't relate to Pokemon. We cut to Miyamoto again in the mountains, now encountering a multitude of rare Pokemon, including legendaries and other rare things. But her heart is only set on Mew. She says that everything is about Mew, and she begs her daughter to understand her and what she is doing. After fighting more Pokemon at Giovanni's side, Mewtwo finally begins to question what he is doing all this for. He tries to escape his armor, and Giovanni tells him no, that his purpose is to serve humans, as is the purpose of all Pokemon in Giovanni's eyes. Mewtwo is enraged by this, not believing himself to be human, but not a Pokemon either. He breaks free of the chains and returns to the original lab that he destroyed. Now certain that he is the strongest living being, he believes that he deserves to rule the world. We get one final glance of Miyamoto on the mountain, now unable to even remember her daughter's face, but still set on finding Mew, even if it is until the end of time. Giovanni ends the series stating that Miyamoto's whereabouts are unknown. And at this point, this leads into the first movie, and is where the radio drama ends. So now I want to give you my final thoughts on this radio drama as a whole, and what my takeaways are, and what I think the main idea was. And I will also leave you guys with some questions if you want to ponder on them, or even respond in the comments down below if you guys want to talk about it. That would be awesome, and I would love to read it. So I view this drama as a cautionary tale, obviously with Mewtwo and the ethics surrounding his creation and cloning in general, as well as what can result due to an obsession over a purpose in life. I think that one of the main ideas that this radio drama tries to bring up is the idea of nature versus nurture. On the nature side of things, Mewtwo was created in a lab as a clone, not human or Pokemon, but something else entirely. So I wonder how this affected his way of thinking. Was he even capable of feeling the same emotions as both humans and Pokemon? We see that he starts to cry, and Amber explains that only humans can cry when they are upset. However, the movie would say differently if you watch to the end of it. So I'm curious about how Mewtwo's nature affects his emotions and how he responds to different ideas. I am also curious about how this affects his outlook on life. If his emotions are so different from other living beings, obviously that would affect how he views the world around him. On the nurture side of things, Amber 2 dies, Fuji only saw him as an experiment, and Giovanni used him as a tool for greed. It's no wonder why Mewtwo hated humans. Every interaction that he had with them was negative. It was either abandoned or the means to an end to humans. So it's really no wonder that he ended up in the way that he did. So I'll leave you guys one question to think about with Mewtwo. Is Mewtwo selfish, and it's simply a result of his nature that he acts the way that he does, or is he a result of his environment? Personally, I think it's a result of his environment, but I'm very curious to see what you guys think. And finally, I want to talk about Miyamoto's story. I am very sad that she was never animated or even brought up in the Pokemon anime because I think she adds some very interesting lore to the story, but I just want to talk about her role in this radio drama overall. So obviously she is a cautionary tale as well. Her greed drove her to insanity, she missed out on her daughter's entire life and stranded herself in the mountains on her quest for Mew, and it was ultimately fruitless in the end. She probably died in the mountains at some point, never being able to find Mew or help her daughter in any way. In a way, I think that she proves Mewtwo's point about humans being greedy and selfish. Obviously, she was only thinking about finding Mew and never thinking about the fact of how this could affect her daughter since she was missing out on her entire life. And much like Mewtwo, she stopped putting others first and caring about others for her own selfish reasons, which I think makes her a very interesting character, and I would love to have seen more of her. And let me know what you think of her as a character, because I'm very curious. I like her as a character, I think that she's very interesting, but I'm curious what other people think, so let me know. And that is where I'm going to wrap up this video. I am going to do a couple videos of some other Pokemon radio dramas, because there are at least 2 other ones that I know of that I want to discuss on this channel. So it'll kind of be like a mini-series within another series. So, that'll be fun. Anyway, if you liked this video, please give it a like, maybe subscribe if you want to see more, leave a comment as I brought up before, and that is where I'm going to end it. So thank you for watching. I will see you guys in another one. Bye bye!